The video I want to show you is going to change a lot of South Africans' idea concerning foreigners, but I'm afraid Zulu people will not understand English because this guy is Zimbabwean. He speaks deep English.
Big minority population of Zulus, Debeles in Zimbabwe. We don't call them foreigners. You know that 20% of our population came from Natal, KwaZulu. They are in Zimbabwe now. We don't call them foreigners. Xhosas, they came with the colonial, the colonial army of Cecil John Rhodes from Eastern Cape, the Fengus and the Xhosas in Zimbabwe. Those two languages, Zulu and Xhosa, they are official languages of Zimbabwe. We don't consider them foreigners. They are Zimbabweans. This is the difference. You have a historical baggage which you need to address. But unfortunately, those who don't want Africa's progress, they weaponize poverty and make Africans fight against each other.
And to Zimbabwe's ongoing economic challenges, which have pushed so many citizens to seek opportunities in South Africa, as well as broader questions around regional migration, integration and governance in the region. For more on this, we're joined by Ambassador Christopher Muchangwa, who is the former Minister of War Veterans in Zimbabwe. Ambassador, very good evening. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good evening, South Africa.
It's an absolute pleasure, and welcome to South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, you are part of a generation that fought liberation war and later negotiated land compensation in Zimbabwe, to restore Zimbabweans' sovereignty. And just considering that about 2 to 3 million Zimbabweans fled to South Africa, for better livelihoods. But then that really never translated into better livelihoods in South Africa for the Zimbabweans. So what do you think really went wrongly?
Well, I think it was better livelihood for Zimbabweans in South Africa because they were coming for greener pastures. There were two reasons. One is historical. Capital in the colonial era, when both Zimbabwe and South Africa were under settler minority rule, capital followed white because the centers of capital were in Europe: London, Paris, Milan, Frankfurt, New York. This is where money was coming from. And it took a racial dimension. You will actually appreciate that on the African continent, South Africa had the highest population of whites, and second was Rhodesia. And the two countries between them, they had the lion's share of capital coming into Africa at that particular time. So the migration of Africans to the pole where capital was in abundance, was in excess, was such that people moved southwards. You may have had Zimbabweans coming south into South Africa, but we also had sizable Zambians and Malawians coming into Zimbabwe. The difference is that when we became independent, we converted all those foreigners, Malawians and Zambians, to become Zimbabwean citizens. So we don't have this particular issue about trying to brand one African against the other.
But then was the war won, or was it only the land that changed hands?
No, the war was won. We became the first liberation movement in history to accept democratic elections, even after we had won, or we were on the point of militarily winning. Your template, which delivered South African independence, was actually based on the Zimbabwean experience. Had we not accepted as a liberation movement to go for democratic elections, your transition to democracy would have been much more difficult than what you eventually did. So we became actually the example about how a modern African can assume democratic ethos. When you try to say economic issues, these are historical. That's what I'm trying to say. You had a fate of capital because whites were the dominant race at that particular time. But now the world has changed. Capital is found in Riyadh, capital is found in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Mumbai, capital is found in Sao Paulo, in Istanbul, Singapore, Seoul, also all over capital is available. And with the advent of this fate of capital in a democratized manner on the global stage, we have got an opportunity as Africa to get a chance to grab capital from those areas where it is in Sefate. And this is what is happening. So the economy of Zimbabwe right now is the fastest growing in the sub-region. And I can assure you that in the next 10 to 15 years, Zimbabwe will grow between 8 to 12% per annum. Assured.
But then if land redistribution was meant to be the foundation of self-reliance, why are so many beneficiaries of that redistribution, queuing outside the embassies of South Africa, perhaps for visas, rather than farming the land that you help them reclaim?
This is the historical aspect. We are talking about a situation where when we took back the land, the Western countries became hostile to Zimbabwe. We had an ultimatum given to Zimbabwe in Maputo in 2002 by Robin Cook, the British Foreign Secretary, which said if Zimbabwe does not return land to the whites, the economy will tank. So we had a hemorrhage of capital from Zimbabwe because of the dominance of the Western financial system, which was arraigned against Zimbabwe. I became ambassador of Zimbabwe to China precisely to address that issue, and we had our Look East policy. And I can tell you now that the success of the Zimbabwean economy is a product of a more democratic capital market on the global stage. And we are doing very well. You have a steel industry which had to close. Why did it close? Because the competition was coming from Zimbabwe. We are the only sub-Saharan Africa with a modern steel plant on the scale which the continent has ever known. The belief before was that only white settler capitalist economies of Rhodesia and South Africa could deliver a modern steel plant. We have changed that template. We also have the only global south economy with the lithium industry which produces beneficiated lithium. You are building a big plant in Richards Bay now. Well, I think we are going to be producing lithium phosphate batteries. Where are you going to get your lithium? From Zimbabwe. We are producing lithium for the global market as part of the value chains. Your president was in Zimbabwe a couple of weeks ago, meeting our president. What were they talking about? About coalescing the value chains of the two most advanced economies on the African continent in terms of historical exposure to capital. We are bringing them together. And so when we go through that process of integrating those two economies, it means capital can flow much easier between Zimbabwe and South Africa and the African continent. What has happened now
Ambassador,
is that...
We're out of time, unfortunately. But let's talk a bit about, the regional integration and the freedom of movement. Should SADC, be moving towards an EU-style freedom of movement, or would that simply formalize South Africa, absorbing the human cost of its neighbors' governance failures?
No, to the contrary. What is happening in Zimbabwe now is that in a couple of years now, there may actually be upward migration of South African labor to Zimbabwe.
What makes you say that?
Labor force. Because we are doing well as an economy. We are growing now at 6 to 7%. We have a modern steel industry which you don't have. If you go to Byte Bridge today, there will be 200 to 300 trucks transporting steel from Zimbabwe to support your fabrication industry here in South Africa, which is the most advanced on the African continent. Where's that raw material coming from? It's from Zimbabwe. So
but then if you are doing well, Ambassador, why isn't that reflecting in the number of Zimbabweans going back home, since the economy is doing well, as you claim it to be?
They are actually going back home. The biggest number of Zimbabweans who are going back home, it's white Zimbabweans. They came here in the 1970s. They didn't want to fight in Ian Smith's army. They came here at independence in 1980. They didn't want majority rule in Zimbabwe. But most of them now, they've come back home. So when the most capable and affluent population of Zimbabwe, which was in the diaspora, begins to go back home, it's only a matter of time before the poor ones whom we are struggling with here also come back home. Because the economy is beginning to pull up. We cannot try to penalize the present government for historical issues which we are addressing as a government. That's why our president has gone out of his way to say Zimbabwe is open for business. Believe you me, we are creating you have a professional middle class with the African majority in South Africa. In Zimbabwe, we have a proper middle class. Every house in Zimbabwe is fully paid for. Every car in Zimbabwe is fully paid for. We have a gold industry which is growing at a rate which Africa has never known. That's why we work with the hardest currency on earth, which is the Zim dollar, which is the US dollar. In Zimbabwe, we don't fill forms like you do in South Africa to get US dollars. You just get them in the street. We have a fate of US dollars because on our current account, we are doing very well. So we are lifting up. It takes time. but we're on the right trend.
But then, Ambassador, is the real obstacle to integration not borders at all, but the refusal of governments like Harare's to reform enough citizens who choose to stay in Zimbabwe?
No, the real problem of integration is historical poverty, which makes poverty be weaponized in South Africa. Who are beating each other up? They are the poorest in South Africa. Right. They are fighting against their poor colleagues who come from across Africa. We have a big minority population of Zulus, Debeles in Zimbabwe. We don't call them foreigners. You know that 20% of our population came from Natal, KwaZulu. They are in Zimbabwe now. We don't call them foreigners. Xhosas, they came with the colonial, the colonial army of Cecil John Rhodes from Eastern Cape, the Fengus and the Xhosas in Zimbabwe. Those two languages, Zulu and Xhosa, they are official languages of Zimbabwe. We don't consider them foreigners. They are Zimbabweans. This is the difference. You have a historical baggage which you need to address. But unfortunately, those who don't want Africa's progress, they weaponize poverty and make Africans fight against each other. But they address the challenges to the governments of Africa, make Africa become successful, bring capital on a scale which then makes competitive advantage in Africa, become a source of value chains which we share as a continent. That's why with the Africa Free Continental Trade Area. That is happening. That's why your president was in Zimbabwe to meet our president.
Now, President Mnangagwa's presidency, which was initially hailed as reformist, but then, became... well, it was rigged with allegations of election rigging and economic challenges. And now, the fact that there is calls to extend his rule to 2030, does that simply guarantee 2 more years of the same conditions that have prompted Zimbabweans to move to South Africa?
The country which is attracting capital on a scale which Zimbabwe is doing. Of the 6 billionaires doing lithium phosphate in the world, 4 are in Zimbabwe. The top billionaire doing private steel in the world, the one who makes 10% of Indonesia's GDP, Chiang Kwangda, is in Zimbabwe producing steel. We are attracting capital on a scale which Africa may have not considered in the past. This is a product of Emmerson Mnangagwa as president. For that, the people of Zimbabwe are happy because they are saying, if it is not broken, don't fix it. In any event, there were people who were thinking that on the passing of the relay stick in a race, they were going to ambush the Zimbabwean revolution, the Zimbabwean democratic process. We have shortchanged them, we've upended them, because we said you can run another 200 meters before the stick is passed on. We want to see whether they will last out.
All right, Ambassador, great chatting to you.
He is right. In 2006, I remember, there were a lot of foreign nationals in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia. So many people coming from neighboring countries were too much in Zimbabwe. And none of them didn't have ID of Zimbabwe. None of them was not a Zimbabwean. Anyone who come to Zimbabwe automatically become a Zimbabwean. There was a way they were being documented. But in South Africa, it looked like they have done something that is unusual. It is usual. Be with your brothers. Be one with your brothers. Support your brothers. Majority of us, we follow white people. But it was impossible for us to give all the land to white people in Zimbabwe. And these white people were building certain houses. They were saying, you people will stay here. They were giving you houses to stay. You were staying like some people who are being protected. It was not good for us. We will actually have nothing absolutely. So they have to do something. Now they have done something. You have chased the white people. So what are you doing here? It looked like a crime, but we're actually chasing after revolution. Being free, being people with something, as black people in control. Zimbabwe is growing faster, even under sanctions. That's why he's saying it is competing with South Africa, because South Africa is even growing with white people, but Zimbabwe is on its own. We need to support each other, guys. We don't know the future. South Africa might collapse.